Insellmilkom u nilqakom għal din it-tnedija ta' website ġdida di Critical Angle Project li telenka 10 snin ta' korruzzjoni istituzzjonalizzata f'pajjiżna. Din hija biċċa xogħol importanti u nazzarda ngħid bżonn juża immens. Kull darba li tfaqqas storja ta' korruzzjoni li hija ta' spiss ngħidu tisma' b'xi skandlu ġdid u tinsa ieħor jew ngħidu kieku sewwa ssir lista dettaljata bi grafs u bil-who's who biex żgur ma ninsewx. Issa fl-aħħar xi ħadd tagħmilha. Julian Delia. Inħalli fidejh biex jgħidilkom hu x'kienet l-ispirazzjoni wara din il-biċċa xogħol importanti, però qabel ma insaqsih xi domandi ħanagħti ftit informazzjoni dwaru. Julian Delia huwa ġurnalist li beda l-karriera tiegħu mat-Times of Malta fl-2020. Sena wara beda jaħdem ma' The Shift News. Is-sena l-oħra beda jaħdem bħala ġurnalist għal rasu. Julian jikteb l-iktar dwar il-kriminalità organizzata u l-korruzzjoni, il-politika, l-ambjent u l-migrazzjoni. Barra artikli li dejru fit-Times of Malta and The Shift News, l-artikli ta' Julian Delia dejru wkoll fuq Love in Malta, Politico Europe, Reflect u Das Magazine. Barra li hu ġurnalist, Julian huwa wkoll attivist fis-soċjetà ċivili. Minn mindu Daphne Caruana Galizia kitbet l-ewwel dwar l-iskandlu tal-Panama Papers fl-2016. Qabel ma ngħaddi l-kelma lil Julian l-iskeda llejla ser tkun hekk. L-ewwel Julian se jagħmel preżentazzjoni fejn jitkellem dwar il-features ewlenin ta' dan il-proġett, ser jispjega kif l-aħjar nimirħu navigate fih u nużawha tajjeb. Wara se jkun hemm sezzjoni interattiva fejn ser jingħata aċċess għal master timeline tal-website biex ikollkom l-ewwel impressjoni tagħha. Fl-aħħar nispiċċaw bi Q&A mill-flor. Issa ser naqleb bl-Ingliż peress li xi mistednin huma barranin. I shall be switching to English for the technical part of the program because we have no Maltese guests in the audience. Welcome to this event. It is promising to be very exciting. So, Julian, before leaving you to the presentation, I would like to ask you a couple of questions. What is the Critical Angle Project? How did you set it up? And what was the inspiration behind it?
Okay, so thank you for the lovely introduction, first of all. Thank you for all being here. It's a pleasure to see you all here. So the Critical Angle Project is something that started about a year ago. The instinct that sort of generated this project and this website came from a strong sense of fear. Fear of the very real possibility that all the crimes that we've seen committed over the past decade are very close to being forgotten about completely. There are many stories which we have, in fact, forgotten about. There are many stories which I hope will be remembered now that we have this project, which I'm very excited to show you today. And I hope that it will be another asset which we will use in the fight against corruption in this country.
What was the exact moment when you said, this is what I want to do? Because you told me about it and it's very interesting.
It is an interesting story, thank you. So essentially it was actually in November of last year. We had just seen several legal contortions going on in the Court of Malta in relation to the Giorgio brothers case in court. Essentially they had just pleaded guilty only then to sort of essentially reverse their plea a few weeks after. And that's where this feeling came from, this feeling of knowing that the narrative at this point has been so obscured and it's been twisted and perverted in such a way as to make it almost unrecognizable. So that's essentially where the idea came from. It's originated at a point where I was literally sitting in my car, fuming at the news I was reading on my phone and jotting down notes and trying to figure out an idea that makes sense and that can help really address this glaring issue which I observed in that moment. So that's basically it.
So how will the data be accessible on your website? Will the general public or other journalists or media houses or even activists will it be available to everybody, or are there sections where access is only granted to a limited number of people?
Right, so the tool is entirely open source, so it's available to the general public, it's available to researchers, anyone who wishes to access this tool will be able to do so. Everything will be available on the website, which I will be able to show you now. And I will also be able to give the whole database in different formats upon request as well. So if a journalist, for example, wishes to access this database in the form of an Excel sheet, I'll be able to sort of convert it into the appropriate format and send it according to whoever needs to use it. So
And this is a one-man show. There's no one else like.
well, I mean, yes, it was a one-man show in the sense that the idea, so the concept and the planning and the effort that went into building it was all my own. Although it would be unfair of me not to acknowledge that there were a lot of people who supported me personally along the way, as well as obviously Republica and the Daphne Foundation, who also helped support this project. So most of the work is my own, but I'm happy to say that I'm backed by a lot of people on this. So, yeah.
So the last question: what needs to happen for this project to be sustained and expanded upon in the future? So we'll be having updates, or can we sign up for updates?
So it's a community-oriented project. So the value of this project will increase the more people sort of put work into making it happen. So as I've already said, it has been a one-man show for most part, as in the building of the library was done entirely by myself. But at the same time, I am hoping that now that this project will be available to the public, we're actually soliciting contributions for this project. So if a person knows of a story that they think is really important, but which for some reason or the other has not been included in this timeline, for example, we will have a dedicated contact us section, which will be useful for anyone who wishes to send in any additional information. So obviously, I'm aware that there's only so much one person can do. And I'm hoping that...
It's already amazing what you do.
Thank you. So I'm hoping that now, once it's open to the public, especially when it comes to my fellow colleagues in the media, we'll be able to keep building this library into something that's more and more useful as time goes by.
One final question, truly one final question.
As many as you want.
Because I gave a quick look. You kindly let me have a look before we started. And it is very, very detailed. How difficult was it for you to find the material? And I'm sure Daphne's work is heavily featured.
It is, in fact. So, I mean, as you all know, I mean, you wouldn't be here if you didn't. There's no shortage of corruption in this country. test, 1, 2. Okay, so what you can see here is essentially this, again, as I said, this is publicly accessible now, so you'll be able to look at it as soon as you go on the website and go to the relevant section. So essentially what you're seeing here is a lot of information. So roughly here what you're seeing is about, this is obviously zoomed out just to give you a sense of the scale of the project, but essentially what you're seeing here is about 1,600 data points, all of which are from information in the public domain. So here what you're seeing, I can start, I guess, by explaining the color scheme actually. So what you see in green over here, this is mainly, especially towards these early years over here, this is entirely Daphne's work. So most of those stories that you see in green are either Daphne's work or the work of other journalists at the time who were writing the more critical, important stories. So that is kind of an easy visualization for anyone who wishes to follow. So if we go over here towards this side, I can show you from here. The points you're seeing in red are all critical stories, usually, as in by critical I mean stories which somehow had a particular significance at the time or were pointing towards particularly significant corruption. So essentially the colors are meant to help you navigate the timeline. Obviously, if you don't want it to look so scary, zoom in a bit more, because otherwise you'll just see a bunch of information and it won't really be easy to look at. So obviously, as you can see, the closer you go, the more focused and narrow the date range is. So how you use this timeline depends on what you're trying to achieve. If you're trying to get a general sense of what a particular year was like and you want to look at it from a more sort of like a bird's eye view, you can do that. If you want to get more specific, you just zoom in a bit more and find the relevant section which you want to look at. So for example, over here, we can zoom in a bit more. And as you can notice, there are also other colors which I haven't explained here. So for example, black marks extremely major events like the closure of Pilatus Bank and the exposure of Jürgen Fenech as the owner of 17 Black shortly afterwards. So those are two key major events which obviously had a significant impact on pretty much everything else that was happening. The ones in blue over here represent all stories and reports which were related to the hospitals deal, which is another of the major deals that we are highlighting on this timeline. So if you click on these prompts, what you will get is relevant information about each one. So for example, this is an article from 3 years and 11 months ago, which is talking about a magistrate who ordered a new inquiry about VGH. So as you can see, every single prompt you see on this timeline has detailed information. It explains exactly what happened on that day, and you also get a link to the article which the information is being sourced from. So any prompt that you use, any prompt that you click will basically give you as much information as was available at the time. Some of the other prompts also have additional documentation with them. So for example, the prompts that you're seeing in gold over here are all the sittings of the public inquiry into Daphne Caruana Galizia's murder. So essentially there's every single sitting, and what you will see on each bubble is more or less the same. So you'll get a news report, which is a summary of what was said by that person in their testimony, and you will also get, again, a link to that article, a link to the full live blog, and the actual transcript from court itself. So you'll be able to get a word-for-word breakdown of what was said by that person in that particular testimony, obviously because the public inquiry was a very significant event. So in a nutshell, although it's a bit difficult to put all of that in a nutshell, but I'm trying, that is how the timeline works, right? So it's a very simple, effective tool. As you can see, it's the kind of project which never really finishes. It's a constantly ongoing project. And in fact, the launch version of this website, of this data library, sorry, is up to date up until 2022. So for now, I have not yet featured stories that have been published in 2023, but that will be a constantly ongoing process. So more or less, that's what the library does. As you can see, it's one thing to more or less roughly remember what happened in a particular time, but it's another to see it in front of you like this with all the relevant information, especially with the benefit of hindsight and the knowledge that we have today about these scandals at the time. So obviously we did not have the same level of knowledge. So the idea is to facilitate the process of keeping track of all of this. So that is the main feature of this website. As I said, this is entirely available, so there's no fees that need to be paid. There's no blockage to this access. It's all completely immediately accessible to the public. And just in case you weren't sure about my explanation, or maybe haven't explained how to use it clearly, you also have a guide here. So essentially, this is a list of the stories which are currently available on this timeline at the moment. And there's also a brief guide over here which kind of explains the different types of prompts that you will see, what the colors say, and what stories they are referring to in that sense. So that is the main feature which we will be launching with. And as well, just, I mean, to explain another key aspect of launching this website, this is our very first commentary piece on this website. So essentially, we called our first commentary piece Unanswered Questions because we feel like that is the whole point of this data library. The whole point of this data library is to point towards all of these things, all of these narratives which we've lost over time, to talk about the gaping questions which have been left in the vacuum that has been created by all of this corruption. So obviously, I'm not going to read it out loud to you just now, because that will take a while. But just to give you an idea, this is the list of all the questions which we feel the government has failed to answer. So as you can see, there's quite a list. So yeah, I mean, I felt like this was the best statement we could start with, until these kinds of questions are answered in a way which confidently means we know the truth and nothing but the full truth. This country will not heal. This country will not move forward from all the damage that has been caused to it. So we feel like this was the main starting point. So essentially, that is the Critical Angle project. Now, what I would like to do with this next part of today's session, essentially, is to give you some classwork. So I hope you're ready to work. Right, I don't know whether we should maybe pause for questions now for a bit, and then I think I'd like to sort of just proceed to the next part. Unless anyone has any questions they would like to ask now, we will also have a brief question and answer session later. So, okay? All right.